Hello everybody. My name is Brittany Fuller. I'm a clinical mental health counselor located in Charlotte. I specialize with working with people who have experienced sexual trauma and are experiencing PTSD. I also, in general, work with people that are experiencing mood disorders or some more acute mental health illnesses. So, what we're going to focus on today, as said before, is just describing how trauma affects the brain and body, particularly when we're experiencing a PTSD trigger. And hold on, I'm sorry, I just lost access to my screen. There we go. Particularly when you're experiencing a PTSD trigger. And then we will also be explaining what grounding techniques are and why they are effective. We're going to go through a bunch of different types of grounding skills that are based out of DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, EMDR, and sensory regulation. These are all evidence-based treatments with some really great tangible skills. And then we're also going to explore techniques to manage hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, and flashbacks. So jumping right in, just wanted to define what is a trauma trigger. So a trauma trigger is any stimulus that reminds a survivor of a past traumatic event. And when we experience this trigger, it causes our nervous system to react as if the trauma is happening right now in the present moment. Triggers can be sensory-based, meaning that they can come from our external environment through our eyes, through our ears, our nose, through our touch, physical touch, but they can also come emotionally. So if we start feeling feelings of vulnerability or we feel threatened, sometimes these internal emotional experiences can also cause us to feel triggered and bring us back to an original traumatic event that maybe created some powerlessness or helplessness. So what we're going to do today is just better understand how these triggers work so that we can figure out how to manage them more effectively when they pop up for us in our daily life. So I'm going to start by just explaining the brain's response to triggers. I'm going to go ahead and let everyone know that I am not a neuroscience expert, so this will be a pretty basic understanding of what's occurring in the brain and body when we experience a trigger. If the science behind things is not totally your thing, don't worry. You can still utilize the grounding skills without perfectly understanding the science behind it. But I do think it's pretty interesting and it can be very helpful. So I wanted to go over that with everyone today. So step one, first thing that has to happen when we're experiencing a trigger is we have to be in a situation where essentially sensory input is coming through our bodies, through our eyes, nose, ears, mouth, skin. And essentially our nervous system picks up on this sensory information. And this can come not only from the external environment around us, but again, it can also come from internal sensations. So you might start to notice that your heart rate is beating a little bit faster, and sometimes even just having an increased heart rate can trigger some of this information. So once that sensory input is received into our nervous system, it goes through our brainstem, which controls basic survival functions like heartbeat, breathing, digestion. I added a little picture, the part that's red and is highlighted, that is the brainstem. So immediately when we experience a trigger, whether that's a sound, the brainstem is processing this information and it's responsible for quick automatic reactions. This part of our brain is just very focused on survival, and so it's taking in that sensory information and it's quickly assessing whether the input is a potential threat or not. From there, that information travels to our amygdala. I feel like some people tend to know about the amygdala more commonly than other parts of the brain. But if you have not heard of it before, it is the lovely part of our brain that is responsible for emotional processing. And it's heavily involved in detecting threats and generating emotions like fear or anxiety. So if you've ever just noticed in any situation that you're feeling really anxious, it's likely due to your amygdala being active. So once the sensory information makes it to our amygdala, it is the amygdala starts to activate the fight or flight response. This is a survival mechanism. It's designed to prepare the body to either fight or to escape the threat. So if your amygdala is activated and you're currently experiencing a trauma trigger, you might notice that your heart rate is starting to spike, your breathing is becoming rapid, maybe you have muscle tension, and your digestive system may shut down. So this is everything that your body is preparing you for action so that you can either run away or fight the threat that is in front of you. So again, you might feel panicked, you might feel anxious, angry, ready to flee, and this is all just driven by your brain's survival instincts. This is a great response when you're actually in the presence of a threat, but our brain can't determine the difference between what is a real threat. So say a tiger being in front of you that has the potential to harm you, versus just a random sound that reminds you of something that happened in the past. So when we're in the presence of more of a perceived threat and we're not actually in danger, when this starts to get activated and you start to feel panicked or anxious or angry, it can feel overwhelming. So next step is the prefrontal cortex goes offline. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain. It's located near the front behind our forehead. And this is the part of our brain that distinguishes us from other mammals. So it helps us with reasoning, decision-making, emotional regulation. It helps us organize, make judgments, and to just, in general, think logically. However, when we are under stress or when the prefrontal cortex is under stress and we experience a trigger, the brain prioritizes survival over rational thought. So essentially what happens is the prefrontal cortex becomes less active, meaning the ability to think logically or make decisions is compromised. And this makes a lot of sense because if we're going off that example again, if you are somewhere and there's like a tiger, you have to be able to think fast and your brain has to activate based off survival responses. We wouldn't really have the time to think through the pros and cons of do I run, do I fight right now? It just has to be automatic, which is why this part of our brain goes offline so that the survival parts can take over and just focus on keeping us alive. So as a result, this part of our brain goes offline. And if you're actively experiencing this, you might feel confused, overwhelmed, or even out of control over your response. And it might be really hard to calm down or just think clearly. So another example of this is if you might have experienced this yourself or seen it in another person, if they're feeling really overwhelmed or they're having a panic attack. It's hard to just tell someone, this typically isn't helpful to be like, calm down, but you can't really, people can't really hear that when they're in this state. They can't think logically. It's all just these like automatic physical responses that are happening. And then lastly, step 4, the brain hijacks the body. So at this point, the stress hormones come to be very active. So the brain releases adrenaline and cortisol to essentially fuel the fight or flight response. So when you're at this point in a trigger, you're likely experiencing a very rapid heartbeat. You might be breathing very fast. You likely have more muscle tension and have just a general sense of heightened alertness and awareness. And that's so that you can respond as quickly and effectively as possible to a threat. However, this physical response, when there is not a real present threat, can make a person feel like they're stuck in a panic or an anxiety loop. And then it also just has an overall feeling of loss of control to it, making it difficult for the person to stop the response. It might make them just feel like they're trapped in hypervigilance, panic, fear, and then just reinforcing that trauma response. So just to review what we just talked about, I'm going to put an example to it so it can make it a little bit more concrete. So say we're using the example of someone who recently experienced a car accident and they're struggling from some PTSD following that. Say for the example that they're just outside somewhere, they're not really near a street, they're having lunch and sitting at a table, and they hear a loud boom go off somewhere in the distance. If they were triggered at the original time of the trauma based off the sound of the crash of the car, and that boom kind of is similar to that original crash sound that they heard, that sensory input is going through your ears, it's filtering through your brainstem, which is automatically picking up on that sound, or not sound, that sound, sorting through it to decide, is this a potential threat? And then it's going to the amygdala, which is activating that fight or flight response and generating fear. And then the prefrontal cortex goes online. So that person might have a really hard time distinguishing the fact that they're currently safe, they're currently sitting at a table, they're not actually in a car accident, they're not back at that scene, but they might have a hard time thinking that through because the prefrontal cortex is going offline. And then from there, the brain is releasing those feelings of panic, helplessness, overall, just like emotional, physical response. This is all happening very, very quickly, probably within the matter of seconds, even potentially even less than that. So all of it's happening very rapidly, leaving the person to have this big response that might feel hard to control. And this is really, really just challenging in general if you're experiencing this on a regular basis, because you're likely in situations like the one that I was using. If you're sitting at a restaurant, if you start having this visible response and the people surrounding you don't really know what's going on, it can lead to a lot of feelings of shame, or lead to a tendency to isolate if we feel like we can't control these responses. So that is in general how our brain is responding to these trauma triggers and the process that is happening. I also wanted to just generally explain a little bit more about our nervous system based off polyvagal theory. So this will be similar to what we just talked about, but this is also just in response to general stress. When we face a trigger, if we're just facing long-term or short-term stress where we're feeling overwhelmed. So our nervous systems can react in one of two main ways. There's arguably maybe one or two other ways, but we're just going to focus on fight, flight, or freeze and shut down for today. So fight or flight is a lot of what we just went over. It's an active response, meaning that when we experience that fight or flight, we're either running or we're fighting. And the body is just overall preparing us to be able to do that when we feel threatened. So signs that you might feel in this situation that we talked about previously is that increased heart rate, the rapid breathing, the tense muscles. You might feel just a sense of restlessness or panic. Again, our brain can't necessarily perceive the difference between a real threat and just the perceived threat. So you might be going into a minor fight or flight response when you're just seeing a bunch of emails in your inbox, or having to do something that you find stressful, or just driving in your car. If you find that to be activating, you might just notice some of that increased heart rate, difficulty taking a deep breath, just feeling generally tense. On the other hand, we also have our freeze or shutdown response. This is an inactive response, and what that means is that you could be feeling a lot of the similar things to the fight or flight response, but your body's not necessarily moving, it's not reacting, it's kind of just getting stuck inside. So what this situation could look like is if the stress is really overwhelming, the body can enter this freeze or shutdown. You might feel numb and unable to move. You might feel like disconnected from your emotions or the environment around you. We see the freeze response really commonly in animals as well. If they assess that they, like, for example, if you have a zebra and it's trying to come face to face with like a lion, it might not be able to fight and it might not be able to run away. So it might play dead as a last ditch effort to escape the predator. So we experience that response as well. It just looks a little bit different, where we just might not be able to find the inertia to move or do the things that we need to do. I noticed the freeze response, or that shutdown response, quite a bit with people who are maybe experiencing like depression or anxiety. It might look like procrastination when you really need to get something done, but it just feels like you can't get your body to move and do the things that you need to do. The freeze response is also very common with sexual trauma. So I just want to normalize that a bit as well. And there's no shame for any of these responses. It's our brains do it. They're just automatic. So again, just highlighting that a little bit more. Both of these responses are normal. They're natural reactions and they're survival responses. And neither is better than the other. No response is wrong or right. And we're also just not in control of which response our brain automatically chooses to use to keep us safe. All right, so now that we got through all of the theory behind our nervous systems and behind what happens in our brains when we're experiencing a trigger or just panic in general, I want to talk about how grounding techniques can help with this. So we'll go over grounding techniques. We're going to practice quite a few today, but just some theory behind why they work is that when we're triggered, the amygdala, which we talked about earlier, the brain's alarm system creates the fear and the anxiety. It activates that fight or flight or freeze shutdown response. So when we're practicing grounding techniques, it helps to calm the amygdala, reducing the emotional intensity of our response. These techniques also engage the prefrontal cortex. We have to think a little bit to do them, not too hard, but that can kind of help us regain control at that part of our brain so it doesn't shut down to the full degree. And then also grounding can stimulate the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that is responsible for memory. And when we can stimulate the hippocampus, that helps us differentiate the past versus the present, which can help us distinguish when we're facing a trigger. This isn't what happened to me previously. I'm right now in the present moment. I'm safe. Nothing or nobody is trying to hurt me in this moment. So at this point, we're just going to move into practicing. These skills are going to range in their level of complexity. I'm going to start with some of the more simpler basic strategies first. I feel like when I've maybe presented these to people in the past, sometimes it can be like, oh, this feels really simple. Like, I don't know how this is going to help me in some of these moments, or maybe this idea that we need more complex strategies. But the reason why we want these to be pretty simple is the fact that when you're experiencing these triggers, you're in high distress and that prefrontal cortex that we talked about is going offline. So the easier, the more simple, the most accessible coping mechanisms in that moment are going to be essential because we're just not going to have the ability to think through multi-step processes. So I just wanted to give you guys that information. And then as we go through this, participation is encouraged, but it's not required. Feel free to practice on your own without pressure to share about your experience. We'll have some time to talk about it at the end. And I have like a range of different types of activities. So some you might really resonate with, some you might be like, I just didn't enjoy that one. That's totally normal and okay. We can just give it a try and see what they feel like. So the first one, I feel like a lot of people have heard of just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. It's probably the most well-known one that I notice clients tend to already have knowledge of. So what this one does is it helps us get back into our senses, because when we're having these like automatic anxiety, panic, or trauma responses, we're probably really deep into our thoughts, stuck in these automatic responses. And we need to get back into our body and back into the present moment where we are safe. And the only way that we can get back into our body is by experiencing things through our senses. So things that we can see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. So I want us to walk through this one together, and I'll give you guys a little bit of time to do this, just a couple of seconds between each one. So just start with looking around the room that you're in right now and just noticing to yourself 5 things that you can see around you right now. And then from there, take a moment to just notice 4 things that you can touch. You might notice the seat you're sitting on and that you can feel that. You might have to grab some things around you and feel them, but just notice 4 things that you can touch. And now take a moment to just notice 3 things that you can hear in your surroundings. One of them might be my voice. You might be able to hear your air conditioning, or maybe the sound of your pet near you. Take a second to notice. And then 2 things that you can smell. This one can be a little bit tough if there's not like a candle or an obvious scent around you, but maybe if you have some coffee or a drink, notice that. And then lastly, noticing one thing you can taste. Maybe you have some water around you or some food if you're eating some lunch. Just notice that. This one's very simple, but very accessible. If you are experiencing anxiety, panic, or a trauma response, and you can't remember the order of the 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, I've been exposed to this a million times, and sometimes I still mix up the order. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Just try to notice like general things that you can see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. So you don't have to do it perfectly in that order for it to be effective, but just even if you can remember in that moment of anxiety to pay a little bit extra attention to your senses, you will notice that it starts to ground you a bit more. All right, another simple one is just simply holding and describing an object. So if you guys all want to find an object nearby, maybe you have a smooth rock, a fabric, a pen, maybe even just your phone somewhere around you. I have a little bottle of room spray, and just hold the object in your hand and just get a feel for it. And take a second to really notice its qualities. So what shape is it? What textures can you feel? You might even close your eyes while you do this to just really pay attention to the physical touch. Noticing how warm or cold it might feel, if it's room temperature. Noticing how much it weighs. You might notice it makes a sound, like I make a sound off mine. And just take a second to just really observe the item in front of you. If you're muted, you can also describe the object out loud or just in your mind. And just keep your focus grounded in the present moment, noticing the object in your hands. This one can be really effective and very subtle. So if you are finding your anxiety has been much higher, you're dealing with a lot of triggers recently, you could always keep like a little stone or a little fidget even in your pocket. And when you notice that heart rate start to increase or the general sense of nervousness, you can go ahead and grab it and practice this, and no one would necessarily know what you're doing, which can be really key when you're trying to function and get through your day and manage some of these responses. Describing and observing is also a core part of mindfulness. And when we're observing and describing, we have to really focus. And that can take us out of some of those like racing, running thoughts that are pulling us in a different direction and kind of making us maybe feel threatened or unsafe. So another more simple one that we can quickly do in a difficult moment. All right, now we're going to talk about using cold to calm the body. I'm going to talk about TIP, which if anyone is familiar with dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, this is one of the skills from distress tolerance, the unit in DBT. TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and paced breathing. We are not going to intensely exercise today. We're just going to focus on the T's and the P's, particularly in this part, the temperature. So cold exposure is a really helpful tool for lowering emotional intensity. Similar to what we just talked about, when something feels really cold, we just immediately notice that physical sensation of it, and that can automatically just pull our attention away from some of the emotional responses that we're having. So there's a couple different ways to do this. The one that I'm going to talk about purposely activates our diet response, which lowers the heart rate, and it stops non-essential blood flow and conserves energy. There's a couple ways to do this. I wish we were all in person so we could try it together and have the materials, but I'm just going to talk you through it. And maybe later at some point, if you want to physically try this, I would definitely recommend. It's very cool. No pun intended. So what you'll do is you will fill a bag with cold water. It doesn't need to be freezing cold. We don't need to put ourselves through pain doing this, but maybe around like tap water cold, or probably around 50 degrees, give or take. And you maybe take tap water, add a couple of ice cubes, or maybe just grab an ice pack. From there, we want to take that bag of water or ice pack and put it on this area of our face, so our cheeks, our eyes, and our forehead. And while we hold it there, we hold our breath for 20 to 30 seconds. And then as we remove the water, we also exhale slowly and repeat as needed. So usually after you do this, you'll kind of feel this rush go over your body, and it feels very calming. And it just in general will slow your heart rate down, takes you out of that fight or flight response, and puts you into a calmer state. We can also do this in less intense ways. If you really needed some sort of grounding skill while you're in a more public place, like you could always just take like a water bottle and press it against your face. Another way to do it would to be just holding on to an ice cube in your hand. That will start to feel a little bit painful, but sometimes that can be helpful when all of our emotions feel like they're just so intense, so difficult to manage. Just focusing on the sensation of an ice cube and slowly letting your emotional response calm down. So cold can be really awesome and a great way to just take control. I also will often recommend, if you do a cold bag of water, you can just double bag it and put it in your fridge. That way, if you're at home and you experience panic attacks more often, you just know it's in there and you can grab it and you can get ahead of that cycle before you're at like a peak panic point. All right, the next one is progressive muscle relaxation. So this is a technique that involves systematically tensing and then relaxing different muscle groups in the body to reduce physical tension and promote relaxation. So I actually have a script that I'm going to walk us all through so that we can physically just take some time to practice this one. So if everyone would like to just go ahead and get comfortable, maybe you'll sit back or lie down in a comfortable position. You're welcome to shut your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, or you can just take a low gaze. You can also feel free to like turn off your camera for this if you have it on and just want a little bit more privacy. And we'll start by taking a deep breath in through our nose and then breathing out. Taking another deep breath in and holding it at the top. And then slowly releasing the air. And then even slower now, taking another breath. Filling your lungs up, holding the air. And then exhaling. We're going to start by moving attention to your feet. You can begin to tense your feet by curling your toes in the arch of your foot. Hold on to the tension and notice what it feels like in your feet. Holding for 3, 2, 1. And release the tension in your feet. And just notice the new feelings of relaxation that take place. Next, begin to focus on your lower leg. Tense the muscles in your calves. Hold them tightly and pay attention to the feeling of tension. Now release the tension from your lower legs. And again, take a second to just notice the feeling of relaxation. And remember to continue taking some deep breaths. Next, tense the muscles of your upper leg and pelvis. You can do this by tightly squeezing your thighs together as if you were trying to hold a penny in between them. Make sure you feel tenseness without going to the point of strain. And hold here. And then release. And feel the tension leave your muscles. Now begin to tense your stomach and chest. You can do this by sucking your stomach in, squeeze harder, and hold the tension. Just a little bit longer. Now release the tension and allow your body to go limp. And just let yourself notice the new feelings of relaxation. We'll just take a deep breath in and release the air slowly. Next, tense the muscles in your back by bringing your shoulders together behind you. Hold them tightly without going to the point of strain. And keep holding. Now release the tension from your back. Notice the new feelings of relaxation. Notice how different your body feels when you allow it to relax. Now tense your arms all the way from your hands to your shoulders. Make a fist and squeeze all the way up your arm and hold it here. And then release. Notice the tension leaving your arms and shoulders. Notice how your arms feel more limp and at ease. Next, we'll move up to your neck and your head. You can tense your face and your neck by distorting the muscles around your eyes and mouth. Hold here. Tense harder without straining. Release. Now lastly, we're going to tense our entire body. So go ahead and tense your feet, your legs, your stomach, chest, arms, head, and neck. Tense harder without straining and hold the tension for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and release. Allow your whole body to go limp and pay attention to the new feelings of relaxation and how different it is from when we're just holding all of the tension. Now at this point, you can just begin to wake your body up by slowly moving your muscles. Maybe adjust your arms and legs with a little bit of a stretch and open your eyes when you're ready. That is a progressive muscle relaxation. This is a great one to do just in general when we're starting to feel panicked. This one is a little bit more complex, so it might be a little bit harder to do immediately, or it's a little bit more complex. But the more we practice it, the more accessible it is in a moment of higher distress. All right, this next one is my favorite, but it's arguably the most silly feeling to do, especially on camera. But what we're gonna do, this is a type of breathing. It doesn't involve counting for those of you that maybe don't love breathing exercises because it involves counting. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a deep breath in through our nose. And as you take in that deep breath through your nose, you want to try to breathe into your diaphragm, not lifting your shoulders, but expanding your stomach. And then as we exhale, we're going to make a deep, steady voo sound, kind of like a foghorn. And while we do that, we just want to notice the vibrations in our chest and our throat. Why this works is because it stimulates the vagus nerve, which helps calm the nervous system and promote relaxation. So we're going to go ahead, we'll do like 2 or 3 rounds. Or go ahead and breathe in deeply through our nose. And then on our exhale, do one more, breathing in through our nose. And then on our exhale, and then you would just repeat a couple of times. I don't exactly sound like a foghorn, but some people might aspire to do that a little bit more effectively. But I find this one to be really nice. Like even after doing that, I can feel more relaxation. So you just want to notice any shifts in your tension or your breath. All right, this one's a little bit more specifically related to safety. So when we've experienced trauma or just long-term chronic stress, our brains can be wired to search for danger or search for threats in our environment. So what we want to do in this grounding skill is look around the room and find objects that signal safety. So just looking around your environment, this could be something like a little closed or locked door, a trusted person, a comforting blanket. Maybe it's your cat or your dog or your partner. And just try to name at least 3 things that can remind you that you're safe right now in this very moment. You want to focus on neutral or calming details. It could even just be something like seeing your favorite color. We can also practice touching something stable, like the chair that you're sitting on, or pressing your heels into the ground and just noticing your feet hitting the floor, which is stable, just to reinforce a sense of security. And this is very simple, but it can help retrain the brain to recognize safety in the present moment instead of staying stuck in the past fear responses and that constant searching for threats. Okay, so this next slide is bilateral stimulation. BLS is what we call it. This is a really core component of EMDR, which is an evidence-based trauma therapy. Essentially, bilateral stimulation activates both hemispheres of the brain and help the nervous system by creating balance. So there's a couple different forms of this. You could just walk around and notice your feet tapping or your feet walking left, right, or even just carry your eyes back and forth in a line across the room. The part that we're going to practice today is butterfly taps. So what you'll do for this is you can take your hands and arms and cross them. And then you're going to put them on your chest, right below your collarbones. And we'll just go ahead and we will practice tapping back and forth from left, right, and just breathing slowly and deeply as you continue tapping. We'll just all do this together. And just noticing the sensations of it. This can be a great one to do when in any moment, really. You can also tap back and forth on your legs and make it a little bit more subtle. But especially when we're experiencing like a trauma response, maybe feel like our body is somewhere else, just noticing the physical tapping on your arms can kind of keep you in the present moment. You can also just kind of give yourself a hug and wrap your arms around yourself. This is another thing that can kind of help ground us and give us some support, especially when we're struggling with so many difficult emotions and sensations. This is another EMDR technique. It's a safe place meditation. It's probably used in other therapies as well, but and as I go into this, I recognize that not everyone has experienced a sense of safety. So even if you need to reframe it to a calm place meditation, that is fine as well. I'm going to guide us through a visualization where we can just create a mental refuge or safety and calm. This can help us reduce our stress and regulate our nervous system and just build an internal sense of safety, especially if the outside world tends to make us feel out of control. So if all of you would like to get a little bit more comfortable, you can close your eyes or take a low gaze. And just go ahead. We've been doing lots of breathing, so take in a deep breath through your nose and exhale out through your mouth. And we're just going to practice creating a peaceful place that you can create in your mind's eye. This could be a place that you've gone before, be a place that you are just completely designing with your imagination. Go ahead and look around you in that place, wherever it is that you feel safe or calm, and notice what you see around you. It's possible that you see the ocean waves, there's some mountains, lots of colors. Let's take a moment to notice what you see. Now notice the sounds that are around you. Perhaps it's just some silence that's very calming. Notice the sounds that are far away and the ones that are closer to you. Maybe you hear some ocean waves or the sound of wind. Maybe you hear some birds chirping. Take a second to notice anything that you can smell around you. Could be salt in the air. And focus on any sensations you can feel on your skin. Whether that's the earth or the grass beneath you. Whatever's supporting you in that place. Notice the temperature, any movement of air, or anything else that you can touch. Just notice any physical sensations in your body while you enjoy this safe place, calm place. While you're in this peaceful place, you might choose to give it a name, whether one word or a phrase that you can use to bring that image back anytime you need to. And when you're ready, You can bring yourself back by opening your eyes and just being aware of where you are now. So that is a safe place meditation. It can get a little bit deeper than that in EMDR and involve some of the bilateral stimulation to really integrate it. But this is a good one to use, especially when we're just dealing with high stress lives. I know sometimes visualization can be hard for some people, so if this one's not for you, that's okay, but it is an accessible tool. All right, and then just making things more focused on mental grounding. This is a skill that we can use once we calm down a little bit, or maybe we're just not as active in the most intense emotional responses. So when we're doing mental grounding, we're essentially just doing anything that can distract us from our thoughts. So you can do this by playing categories. You might notice different animals, colors, movies, and list them out. This is a great one. You can play with a support person as well. If they notice you're going into a panic, you can instruct them to just pick a category and have you jump straight into that. You can also do math in your head by counting backwards from 100 by 7. So just doing simple multiplication tables. We can also do like the alphabet game where you choose a topic and go through the alphabet, naming items that fit. We can also describe a routine in detail. So this one could be good. You might pick like, oh, brushing your teeth, and walk through step by step every single part of that process. But you can also do this if you're just trying to get through a difficult moment, or maybe you're driving a car and you're feeling triggered, and you can just notice I'm turning the steering wheel, I'm putting my foot on the brakes, I'm changing the air conditioning settings. So just really talking yourself through step by step, observing and describing all of your actions. We could also spell backwards if we like. All right, so hypervigilance we're going to talk about briefly. So hypervigilance is the brain's way of staying on high alert after trauma. So it's what our brain does to scan a room or scan a setting for danger in order to keep us safe. This is also a survival response. It's not a flaw, but it can feel very exhausting when it happens in safe situations and it's happening constantly. So all of the grounding skills that we talked about can be specifically helpful for managing hypervigilance. But some other things that we can do is we can do the C shift engage technique. So if we want to practice this to break into the hypervigilance loop, we can acknowledge what's triggering hypervigilance in that moment without a sense of judgment. So for example, we notice and say to ourselves, I'm in this situation, I'm scanning for danger, and that's because I feel unsafe. So we're acknowledging that the process is happening, and we're also acknowledging the emotional response that we're having without judging or getting frustrated at ourselves for having that experience. Then from there, we can try to shift or redirect our focus to something more neutral or positive. So going to that technique we learned earlier, we can notice a safe object in the room, whether that's a cozy blanket, a book, a plant. And we can also try to engage with our peripheral vision, which is what we see to the sides of our eyes, to shift out of tunnel vision. That is a result of that survival mode and that hypervigilance. We tend to really narrow in. So we can try to use our peripheral vision. This can signal to our brain that we're safer than we feel in that moment. And then we can engage in a non-stressful action, whether that's thinking really small in this moment, just drinking water, organizing something, maybe texting a friend, just doing something that can kind of streamline our focus and interrupt that hypervigilant loop that's keeping our brain in the past and reorient ourselves back to the present. All right, and then we also can do mindfulness and thought reframing. So if we're in a moment where we're feeling unsafe, we can ask ourselves, am I safe right now? And check in, asking ourselves, is this a real danger or is this a past fear resurfacing? And even just giving ourselves that moment to ask ourselves that can help us ground a bit. And if we can't find immediate danger, we can gently remind ourselves, I feel alert, but I am safe. And we're still acknowledging some of that emotional response of feeling alert, but reminding ourselves of the facts of the situation. We're in a safe environment. We can also relabel hypervigilance as a survival habit, rather than reality. So instead of telling ourselves, I need to stay on guard, we can shift it to, my brain is trying to protect me, but I am safe in this moment. And even just having that relationship where we're being compassionate and recognizing and maybe even thanking our brain for trying so hard to keep us safe. We are safe in this moment and we don't need it to be as active and on guard for us. And then we'll quickly go through this because I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. But for improving sleep, we would want to try a lot of those different grounding skills that we talked about previously, giving ourselves some time to wind down before bed, whether that's listening to calm sounds or doing gentle stretches. We also can avoid stimulants like caffeine or screens or intense discussions before bed that might activate us. But if we are waking up in the middle of the night due to nightmares, anxiety, nightmares can be extremely overwhelming and can be really confusing for our brain. It doesn't necessarily recognize that wasn't real. So we do need to put an extra effort to touch a familiar object, scan the room, name those 5 things we can see. We can also use a reorientation phrase. So I am in my bed. It is April 4th. I am safe, and just reminding ourselves of the date and the time and that we're in the present moment, not in a past memory. And then I am going to skip this one just for the sake of time, but I am going to send out the slides to everyone here so you can look through this. It is a container exercise that we can use before sleep to create some emotional distance when we're feeling overwhelmed. So just some helpful tips in general, like we've gone over. Grounding works best when we practice regularly. You have to practice when you're calm for it to be most effective when you're feeling overwhelmed. And sometimes we have to try multiple techniques in order to feel relief. And we might have to try several times as well. And then I linked the meditations that I used if anyone is curious or wanting to access those again. And then just thank you for being here and attending. I linked my email and my website, so if anyone has any follow-up questions or need for support, feel free to reach out. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and just leave a couple of minutes for questions if anyone is interested in asking anything. I'll check the chat from earlier. Yeah, I see Emily said similar to the Om in yoga. It is very similar to that.
I have a question.
Yes, of course.
Um, when we have our group meetings, so women supported group meeting, the first steps, I know that sometimes at the end we want to do a type of grounding because we touch on so many different things that could trigger someone. You never know. So what would you suggest for the group as a good grounding one? That's a good one to use.
As like a closing.
Yeah, maybe a minute, 2 minute one or something.
Yeah, I think any of the ones that we went over today could be great, but maybe if anyone is interested, we could try like a unmuting and doing like the Om together and just practice like that breathing and feeling some of that grounding from the vibrations. If anyone's interested, we could do that collectively.
Oh, okay. I've done that one before. I do like that one. Yeah, I'm,
Mhm.
I'm pretty familiar with it.
Mhm. Yeah, anything that really just focuses on senses is key, or that breathing.
Okay.
Um, yeah, does that answer what you're asking?
Yes.
All right, any other questions or thoughts? See, Amy said there's an app called Freya that is for breathing, but it's great for controlled breathing. That's a great recommendation as well. Well, anyone is welcome to reach out if they have any further questions or thoughts. I appreciate everyone being here. Hopefully you have some tools that you can utilize or have just a better understanding of trauma responses in general. And I thank you guys again for joining me today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so much,
you.
everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. We will be sending out the slides and the audio recording so you can see all the wonderful content that Brittany shared today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.